How do you talk to your kids about the Russia-Ukraine war? Joining me is Melbourne child psychologist Deirdre Brandner. Thanks for being with us at Moms at the Table, Deirdre.
Thanks for having me.
So you're here today because of a very important moment in history. It's a worrying moment and a very sad moment. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is all over the news, all over social media. Our kids are hearing about it. Our kids are asking us questions about it. Well, we're here to figure out how do we actually answer them. Perhaps the first thing to ask is, many experts are talking about handling, these kids' questions age appropriately. Can you break down for me actually what that actually means? Like, what ages are we talking about?
I think that's really important to have some clarity around that. We would suggest that for children, 4 and under, unless they actually ask you about what's going on, they're probably of an age where we don't need to go into detail. Obviously, if they ask, I'm hearing these words, Mummy, what does that mean? Why are there pictures of sad people? Then, we address those concerns. But whatever age group, when you are responding to a question, don't go overboard with the amount of information. I think sometimes as parents and adults in children's lives, we feel that if we provide them with lots and lots of information, that's going to reassure them. Sometimes we're providing them with information that's actually not necessary. So whether it's a 4-year-old or a 14-year-old that you're talking to, be mindful of how many details you feel the need to offer. So, we talked about different age groups. There is then the age group where they're either seeing things on telly, they're hearing about on the radio as they travel to school, or it's being talked about in the playground.
Yep. So actually, that is the question that I was gonna check with you. So they're asking you, for these older age groups, they have access to social media feeds, they're talking to friends.
Mm-hmm.
So they're asking you, what is happening?
Yep.
What do you say that's not too much information?
Yeah. So I think one of the things I've tried to continue to do, particularly in my clinical practice, is not always to refer to the situation as a war. I think the concept of war for children is very overwhelming, and they don't have much understanding of that from a political point of view. So I prefer to say the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, or what's happening in the Ukraine. It also becomes less judgmental. It's really important that for children that we're not politicizing this, because they're not in a position to understand, what's going on behind it. So I continually like to refer to it as the conflict that's happening, between Russia and the Ukraine. You give them information that's appropriate to their development. So obviously, if they're teenagers, the vocabulary you use is different, but for younger children, you keep it simple. One of the first things I think is really important to do is to give children an understanding of exactly where Russia and Ukraine is, because the role of media in our day-to-day world, in our lives now, means that everything can feel really, really close. So it's really important for children to understand exactly where this situation is taking place, and particularly for younger children who are feeling quite fearful or anxious. I mean, that's one of the conversations that's coming up. Are we going to war? Are they going to bomb our country? What's happening? So I think it's very important that we give them the sense of exactly where this country is. I do think it's important to explain that, because sometimes countries don't get along and they behave in a way, that's not appropriate. Sometimes this turns into a battle between two countries where they're seeking to take over another country. And in that process, they will want to fight, they will have weapons, and people get hurt and injured and have to leave. So we talk about it in those, that's the sort of language I'm using. One of the things that I am seeing, and this came up in another piece of information I was sharing with my community, is that a lot of children understanding of conflict or war is from some gaming, like a Fortnite or Call of Duty. Now, as a psychologist, I'm never ever going to recommend those games, but let's be honest, there are children who do have the opportunity to play those games, and if not, there's going to be conversations about that. So for some of our young people, it's very important that they understand the difference between what you see on a game and what's actually happening in real life. That doesn't mean that you need to show them actual footage. I don't think that's helpful. It's not necessary. But, children understand that a game's a game. This is a situation where real people are being injured and are dying, and that families are being displaced from their homes because of what's happening.
Would it be helpful to tell them, like try to make it personalized in the sense that, how would you think, how would you feel if this was happening, or would it be bringing it too close to home for them?
I think I can understand what you're trying to do. We're trying to get children to have an emotional understanding of what's happening. I think it's better to say, this situation's a bit like, when we look at this from the world, it's a bit like, somebody who's much bigger and stronger is being really unkind to another person. And we're trying to, as the world, stick up for that younger person because we don't think it's fair that's what's happening. And we feel very sad and worried that that's happening to that person. So I think putting it in that context is really important. And can you see that what I'm trying to aim for is not the attention on the aggressor, because we want to focus our, developing, the desire for, humanity and peace, and an appropriate moral compass is to say, as the world, we're horrified and saddened about what's happening to the people in the Ukraine. And that's why you'll see us, try to raise money for them. There's countries that are trying to take in people who would like to leave Ukraine. And there's also other people who are saying, you know what, Russia, you're not behaving badly. You're behaving badly, so you're not entitled to have this, this, and this now. So it's a bit like, if there was a bully on the playground, we'd say, you know what, we don't like what you're doing. You don't get to go on the playground anymore, or you don't get to play in our football game. So I think with young children, it's really helpful if you can give them that understanding, because they're going to hear things like, sanctions or economic, or, some children will ask, and usually there are boys who just want to fix it physically, and they go, well, why don't we just go in, and why don't we attack Russia, and why don't we say, we
That's
talk
my
about
5-year-old.
yes, he wants to fix it. It's all coming from a good place. I just want to punch them up. They're being mean to that other country. And, of course, we're a long way off trying to understand, the politics and economics of the way the world works. But I think it's saying, I like the way that you don't want that person to be hurting anymore. Okay. But, there are organizations in the world, there are leaders in the world, and they're the ones that are going to make the right decisions about how we, respond to this situation. And because, it isn't our fight and it isn't our argument, there's only so much that we can do when we get involved. But we are letting that, Russia know, or we are letting, whoever it would be, that, that behavior is not acceptable.
I guess to bring your example a bit further, then it's a bit like saying that, if you witness a bullying incident, it's why we call the teachers.
Yep.
And we don't go in to fix it ourselves.
Exactly. So I think, for children, it's the idea of dealing with the injustice of the situation when we explain it to them. It's addressing their fears and anxiety, because we're hearing words used like, and I've heard my clients, we're heading for, a third world war, there's going to be a nuclear explosion, we're all going to die. And there is a degree, particularly within our adolescence, where we don't like to do a little bit of what we call fear mongering. We want to match the horror story that we saw. And they'll say things like, oh, did you see that clip where, there was a 14-year-old girl was there, and then she was bombed, and there is this desire to outdo the knowledge that you might have about, a difficult situation, because of course that's what media presents. It's always the most unpleasant things and the shocking things that are presented that evoke an emotional reaction. So I think it's really important to, when we're talking with our children, to say, look, there are some horrible things that are happening. We have to remember that the news is often going to show the same horror will be over and over again. And it's very hard for us or for young children to understand that news cycle, that it's the same clip that's being played over and over again. It's not that this is happening, every time. So as parents, I think we have an absolute responsibility to put boundaries around what our children are exposed to where we can. But I think more importantly, it's important that we model for our children, whether they're, adolescents or primary school age, that it's not good for us, for anybody, to constantly be exposed to those horrific images. And it's very important that we give ourselves a break from that, and that seeking more and more information about what's going on will often make us feel worse. And we can go down a rabbit hole of this link to this link to this link. Be aware of how talking, thinking, watching images of this impacts your mood. And I actually would say that to parents as well as children.
And what if it's already gotten to the point where they are quite impacted and they're really worried, and they're hearing all this, War 3 is coming, it's everything, and they are really, really concerned. What do I as a parent do now?
Okay, so I think this is the same with any fear or it's really good if we can articulate, what is it that you are worried about? What are you worried that's going to happen? So it might be, I'm worried that Australia is going to get bombed. Okay, so when we talk about, this is what we do in therapy, it's how we treat anxiety or worries, and it's it's recognizing what the thought is and what the feeling is, and it's looking at, well, where is the evidence for that? Where is the evidence that Australia's going to get bombed? Okay, because let's have a look. Let's look at, has this got anything to do with, Australia? Oh, look where Russia is. Look where the Ukraine is. Why would Russia want to come down and attack us as a country? Let's look at why this is happening up here. So sort of giving them the logical reasoning as to why this wouldn't happen. Okay, Australia's a long way away. We're an island. We're too far away for people to want to overtake us. We don't, we're not in that position. So it's giving them the facts that, that Australia is not at war with this country or any other country.
It sounds like it's about, there's the fear that's just overwhelming, but it's about nutting down to exactly
one thought.
Okay.
And it might be, sometimes it can be mixed with, we've seen lots of families that have been separated, and they're showing that, the horrible moment where the dad has to kiss the child goodbye. I mean, it's very difficult to watch. So sometimes that can trigger a fear is, what if daddy had to go away, or what if mummy had to go away?
Yeah.
I would be sad, because the child's recognizing their feelings that child they're seeing is having. So it's important that they understand that dad's sad that he has to say goodbye because his wife and child are going to a safe place. Right? That's what he wants. He wants that child to be in a safe place. It doesn't mean that anything necessarily bad is going to happen to the dad, and it doesn't mean that he's not going to see the mum and dad again. So, but this is what has to happen to keep the mum and dad safe. So I think it's about putting a boundary. We're not lying. We need to be honest, but we also need to not let the emotion of the situation dictate our thinking. Okay.
We're talking about all of this on the assumption that our kids will talk to us, or they're able to identify how they feel. What if those with kids, who tend to keep things to themselves, what should parents watch out for?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Melanie, because as you know, there are some children who will come and be quite overt with their concerns and fears. They're actually the easier ones to deal with, even if it is at bedtime when all this appears to come out.
Yep.
Um, but I think what we look for is changes in our child's mood. And we do know our children best. So in younger children, sometimes it's being more irritable, um, being more teary, being more clingy, being worried about things that they're not usually worried about. Okay, that's how you know there's something going on for your child. With an adolescence, it's usually they are more withdrawn. They're grumpier, they're more nonverbal, which sounds like a misnomer. I mean, more not nonverbal than teenagers usually are. But it is that subtlety of what's going on. So when we try to talk about, sometimes if you don't want to have the direct conversation, that can be really hard with an adolescent, you might say something like, gosh, there's been lots of really sad news at the moment. I know that I'm feeling pretty yuck about it all. You know, I'm wondering if that's how you're feeling. Or have kids at school been talking about, you know, this stuff in the Ukraine? Gosh, it's really hard to deal with those big feelings. So I think normalizing it, saying this is how I'm feeling. I've got lots of big feelings about this. And notice I'm using the word big feelings because it might be fear, it might be sadness, you know, it might be anger. Like, you know, your lovely 5-year-old who just doesn't want, he wants to fix this. So it is about using that word and understanding that it's okay to have those feelings, but
So it's fine for for you as a parent to actually acknowledge that, you know, you're not feeling okay with all of this as well.
Yeah. I think it's really important that children see trust that they can identify with their parent, that this is tricky for them, that they feel bad about what's happening in Ukraine and Russia or whatever the situation is. But feeling bad and feeling sad is different than feeling that I'm vulnerable, this is going to happen to us. So I think that's a really important distinction. And I also think, particularly for that upper primary and adolescent, it's really important that I feel that this situation is bad. I feel bad for this that's happening, but I'm also not going to let that thinking infiltrate every aspect of my life. Okay. And that might feel a little bit selfish, but we have to be able to put a boundary around difficult things that are happening and not let that, you know, impact our day-to-day functioning, because we can't be good parents, we can't be good spouses, employers or employees or anything if we're drowning in, you know, that sea of misery. So, you know, that's about looking after your own emotional health. And it's like everything else, you know, I always say as parents, it's like the oxygen mask analogy that you see on a plane. You have to make sure you've got yours on first before you can look after your child. And that's the same when it comes to good emotional well-being. You have to make sure you're in a good space and you have to model that for your children.
I guess it's a bit like, you know, just trying to say that helping them, that it's terrible, but the way the way to help is maybe, you know, donate to charities or find a practical way in which you can help.
Yeah.
So you're not being completely selfish as well.
Exactly. And I think it's really important that we understand that as good humans, just feeling bad for that country is a sign that you are a good person. And that's the sign that everyone, it's sort of lovely in the way that the whole world together has got a really similar response to a really difficult situation. And in some ways it does, I mean, you know, I don't mean to be philosophical, but it does sort of connect you with everybody else, that, you know, the child, you know, in Germany or the US or Spain is feeling the same way I'm feeling about that situation.
Yeah, sometimes we don't feel like that's enough. Like we just feel like we want to do something else. But
yeah. So some people, it, you know, it is, you know, I know there are things where, you know, children at schools, you know, are drawing love hearts, you know, and writing a beautiful message. Or, you know, I know there's Facebook sites and different sites that you can go on and add something, as well as the donating. For some people, it's different ways that they want to feel that they're helping. For some people it's saying a prayer or saying a wish or whatever it is that makes us feel that we're sending a message out there that we're thinking of these people.
So finally, just if perchance our children, probably the younger ones, aren't even talking about the Russian-Ukraine war. I'm not talking about the ones who are under 4, which you say, if they don't ask, but, older than 4, but it's kind of not on their radar at the moment.
Yep.
Should we bring it up first or just ignore the issue and hope they never find out about it?
I think it's really interesting you asked that because, my sister's got young children and we had this same conversation. She goes, you know what? She says, I didn't mention it to Paddy because I thought it would upset him. So see, this is what we do as parents. And then the teacher was talking about at school and he came home saying, Mum, is there going to be a war? So I'm not just saying because this is what happened to my sister. I do think if you've got a child who's at school, you need to have the conversation because they are going to be hearing about it. I guarantee you. That I just think it's,
so it's best to get in first with
your information that that you can contribute, that you can provide, that has boundaries around it, that's honest without, all the horrific details or, the violence where they might hear about, the horrible stories about guns and explosions and people being injured. I think my suggestion is have that conversation. Say, I suppose at school are people talking about, this country called Ukraine and what's going on there. That's how I would start it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for all that very helpful information. Wondering if you've got anything else that you wanted to add about this whole situation.
Look, I think, first of all, make sure that that you as parents aren't talking about this all the time. Okay, it's not helpful because we've already got this situation. We're still dealing with COVID and now we've got the floods. So it is about, trying to have a balance. It is about not having the news cycle on all the time.
Yeah.
We might be keen to have updates and further information, but find ways to do that themselves. And my other piece of advice is, I know that lots of children shouldn't have TikTok or might have TikTok. Be really mindful of what's coming up on there for these children, because I do know that a lot of children's first knowledge of what's happening over there, even the awfulness, is coming through, on TikTok. So just be mindful of that.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all your tips, and may this war end soon.
I hope so. We hope we're talking about better things really soon.